I loved him. It was a very lucky break for me to meet George and then to invite myself into his life. And I'm grateful for all of the excitement that he brought to it. The Happy Collaborator is going to play, its world premiere is at the Trilon Cinema on Minnehaha in Minneapolis on May 7, Thursday, May 7 at 7 o'clock and 8:30. And right now we have, through this magical interweb, sent links for the thing to be seen by curators all over and various television programmers, and we're going to be doing a few festivals this week. I'm pitching it to George's distributor, which is Documentary Educational Resources in Cambridge, der.org, and that's where you can see a lot of George's films because they are the distributor of George's best works.
Somebody, some time ago, dubbed me the father of public access, which is absolutely ridiculous. There was a whole group of people here, and I was just one of them, one of the people in the crowd.
George Stoney came to the Twin Cities in 1981, and I was learning about video and how to use video, and he came to town to help us learn how to negotiate better contracts for public access with the cable franchising that was going on. And I just fell in love with the guy. He was a dynamic individual. In fact, in I believe 1969, it might have been 68 or 70, but very early, George went with Red Grooms and 2 Sony half-inch Portapacks, a couple of the first ones in the country, to visit Nick Johnson, who was an FCC commissioner in Washington at the time, and showed him how video worked. And Nick, who's wrote the book How to Talk Back to Television, Your Television Set, saw this and he said, "This is groovy." Remember 1969 or so. But Nick was so convinced by George's argument that the human being has a right to public expression using current means of communications technology that Nick was led the way to write the legislation, which then became the vehicle approved by Congress, which then became the means by which cable was franchised across the country, with every municipality, city, township having the right, if they wanted to so exercise it, to negotiate a contract with the monopoly cable system so that citizens could use that system to communicate. And so it goes right back to that meeting with Nick Johnson. And then, of course, George did follow through, traveled all over the country to, I mean, literally dozens and dozens and dozens. I think there are several hundred of these systems now. And I don't know if there was one that he didn't visit. And he was always interested in the differences from one system to another, and looking for good models to share with other systems of how communities were using the technology to change people's minds, to develop new ways to do things. Well, George came to town in 1981 to help us organize for public access, and I was impressed and kept in touch. And come around 1999, when NYU was trying to retire George for the first time, he had a film festival of works by his students as well as works of his own. And he invited me to go out to New York and show my work in progress edit of Eugene McCarthy. And I hadn't seen George between 81 and 99, but seeing him then in 99, I just decided that I wanted to invite myself into his life and make a film about him. And so I asked him, I said, George, is anyone making a film about you? And he said no, which was not true, it turned out. And I said, well, I'd like to try myself if you're willing. And he said, Mike, I don't know why, and I don't know why not. And that was just enough of a green light to zoom in on George's life. And from 99 until he died in 2012, and then over the last 2.5 years since he passed away, I've been immersed in the life and films of George Stoney. He called Facebook Spacebook, and he did not find it too interesting. I mean, it didn't engage him. A few people showed it to him, but he didn't. In general, he distrusted the computer because it put too much stuff between us. And see, with George, you make a film or you write a story because you want to change something. There's something that needs to be made different. There's some social issue, some problem, something that if the right people were exposed to the right information, would then be motivated to make a change. And he really did not, I think one person said, George loved films, but he loved people more. And for George, it was always about, yes, he loved film, but when the lights go off, then what do you do? And it's talk person to person, it's organized to change something, to challenge the system. It's to act on the experience that you've just had. And so whether it's new cameras, cards versus drives, Spacebook, Facebook, whatever it is, none of it is as important as the human interaction, people being with people, and living engaged lives. And if a tool helps enable that, then it's useful. And if it doesn't, then it's a distraction, which in the end kills us.
What was his life?
Keeping up with George was a challenge, because he got up, he would exercise for half an hour, and then he would be on the run for the rest of the day, right into 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, going to films, meeting with people on various boards, teaching a full load until he was 96. He was working on 3 films when he passed away, as well as teaching a full load at NYU, as well as being on the board at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, the public cable access center in New York. So George he always lived large. Well, I've never met Paul Barnes, but Paul Barnes is Ken Burns's chief editor, and made several films with George. Shepherd of the Night Flock, How the Myth Was Made, a film with Pete Seeger called The Hudson Shad. They worked together in the mid to late 70s, and Paul is a terrific editor and made some really fine films with George. John Whitehead is was a student of George's at NYU, to mention a local filmmaker who's very good and has done a lot of good films lately and continues to make good films, although John has begun to play more music than make films. But it's a long list. Right now, a filmmaker that George worked with on a film called The Uprising is another editor who's now directing films. Her name is Suzanne Rostock, and Suzanne edited the film Power of Song with Pete Seeger and Sing Your Song with Harry Belafonte. And she's now directing films, working on a project, documentary about Joan Didion, the author. And see, with George, it wasn't just being in his classroom. It was you worked with him, you just socialized with George, and you learned things. And so people, you know, in his class, sure, went through and became filmmakers of various sorts. And then, but then also, you might work with George on a film, and then, as Suzanne says, think about him every day for the rest of your life, because he had that kind of impact. He changes your perspective, not just on filmmaking, which was a very collaborative process for George, but also on just living a good life.
Did he come to the...
He was here, I think, twice in the last 10 years. I organized one visit, and he came for a Alliance for Community Media conference another time. And but he did see a lot of the world.
Where can people find the happy...
The stuff that's not in the film always bugs me, because you know, you immerse yourself in the life of your subject, and then you learn a lot about it. And of course, in an hour-long show, you can't put a 96-year-old man's life and life work into it. But one of my dream interviews, which I was unable to do, was to interview Martin Scorsese and ask him what it was like to be fired by George, which he was when he was a student at NYU. And in the film, you do learn that George, once upon a time, wished he would be a novelist like Thomas Wolfe. But in the film, you don't learn that he was actually Thomas Wolfe's secretary for a short period. There are a lot of things like that. For instance, George made films all over the world. And we see in the 17 clips in the movie scenes in Brazil and Ireland and Canada, but we have nothing in China, Japan, India, or Africa, where he also made films. And so one buddy, a really good student of George's named David Weissman, said that, you know, someone needs to do the international George, and then someone else needs to do the public access George, and then some, you know, because there are these huge, really full life works in each of these different threads of activity that George had. Anyway.
Future screenings and more details about the happy collaborator George Stoney can be found at www.thecie.org. And the Democratic Visions channel on YouTube features more of Mike Hazard's thoughts on George Stoney.
It's the sort of thing George would do, you know, direct you to make a better show together.
Democratic Visions is independently crafted by volunteers, mostly Democrats, from Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington.